it.
Okay.
We're broadcasting now. I'm going to do the 30-second countdown and then start.
Okay. Welcome back to Match Play. It's been what feels like forever. We have the Charles Schwab. I am joined by my co-host, Spencer Aguiar. Spencer, how are you doing? I have missed you dearly.
I've missed you too, Stephie. It's good to do the show again with you. And, I have to say, if we would have been doing the show when Jason day one a couple weeks ago, we might have been kicked off the air. So it's probably a good thing that we weren't filming for that.
Yes, we, maybe there was, a reason why that didn't happen, because we probably would have been quite obnoxious and lost a lot of our normal viewers. Brooks Koepka won the PGA Championship. That's exciting.
I mean, that's one way to say it, I guess.
We're like that's the most anticlimactic response ever. I'm happy for everyone that had Brooksy. I'm happy for Brooks. It's nice to see him back. I was not happy, was really hoping that Hovland, who continues to break my heart, will continue to probably break my heart, did not pull that one out. How did it go for you last week?
I had a winning week. I mean, that's the positive to it. Unfortunately, I did full fade Brooks Koepka in pretty much every iteration of the market that you could find. So that's never a great answer. I think for DFS, if I could get a redo on that, the ownership was low enough to consider him. And unfortunately, that just wasn't one of the things that I did. He graded lower in my model than I expected him to. I think anytime that you get one of those players that gets overpriced, which in my opinion, he was still overpriced, but then you also get the leverage that gets created with a lower ownership percentage. That's something that you can consider. And maybe that's something I should have looked into more than trying to jump into these 25% routes with Scheffler or Rahm or any of those ways with it. But really the one that destroyed me last week, because I won about 1.5 units, which is good for the way that the tournament went. But I had about a 5-unit swing on Sunday with Steven Jaeger when he absolutely imploded himself off the course. So I had him 2-1 to come top 40. That looked like that bet was locked in, and all of a sudden it didn't win on the last couple holes. I had him top 20. I had him top 5 at 40-1, which I thought had a chance entering Sunday. I had a matchup play with him on Sunday against Justin Suh. So all those plays kind of turned what could have been a really good week out of nowhere into one that was more middle of the pack, but you can never really complain about a win. Like at the end of the day, if you're building your bankroll and you are growing it, that's all you can ask for.
Yep, and we're on to Charles Schwab. So why don't you dive into this tree-lined positional course for me?
Yeah, so we have Colonial Country Club. It's 7,209 yards on the scorecard. We'll talk about that in a second of how that can be a little bit less. Par 70 bent grass greens. It is one of the shortest courses on the PGA Tour. Like, in my opinion, that factor would typically generate this birdie fest output, especially considering that this course has been known to play 200 yards less than that number that I read off a second ago. Although I do think that we realize that length isn't necessarily what makes a course difficult when you look at this playing as one of the more challenging stops yearly. There's been some rain in this area. I think it's going to make the course softer. That's something to at least note. I don't know if you necessarily get a single digit winner this year. Feels more like a 15 under or greater win, but it's not necessarily going to get to these 25, 30 under shootouts, in my opinion. So there's a couple answers here that are really interesting. The first comes down to what you talked about. Tree line fairways. You get a lot of forced layups off the tee because you're going to get these stymied second shots if your drives do go wayward. That's one of the reasons we get a significant decrease in importance for distance. My model didn't necessarily think when I ran an historical trend here that accuracy necessarily got a massive jump either. But when you get these forced layups, like that's going to be a critical component that you need to weigh into your model. So there's kind of two things that happen here, because all those answers I just gave starts turning this into a pitch and putt contest, in my opinion. One, you get smaller than average greens. That's going to accentuate the yearly increase that the field experiences with the flat stick. 6.2% more putts get made from 10 to 25 feet than average. That means that players aren't hitting it as close to the pin, which is what's really interesting about the second part of the equation here, is that there's a 4.1% increase in dispersion of scoring for strokes gained approach that's also taking place. So I think for me, when I ran my model, like the number one answer that tells me is you need to hit a green in regulation. Smaller than average green, 4.1% increase, hit the green in regulation. That's the first step of the equation. Once you do that, I want to find guys who can actually make the putt. And that's one of the reasons why I ran this. I called it a pitch and putt statistic in my model. I mean, there might be a better way to word it than that, but essentially what it does is it finds the average proximity from the ranges that I'm looking for. And then it takes the make percentage from that player from each distance that he's going to have. So essentially a guy who's a better iron player is theoretically going to give himself more chances than a guy who's not a good iron player. They're not necessarily going to make as many of the putts as a good putter will. Like Denny McCarthy will make more putts than Russell Henley will, but Russell Henley's going to stick it closer. So that's what that equation of my model ends up doing, is it's trying to find who can put yourselves in an opportunity to make it, and then who's more likely to make it based off of the number of opportunities that you're getting, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And going right into it, there's a darling that came out from last week, almost a bigger story than Brooks Koepka winning, and that was Mr. Michael Block. It kind of reminds me right now of what's going on with LeBron and the Nuggets. So the Nuggets are on their way to the finals, but all we care about is LeBron retiring, which is hilarious, a little bit ass backwards there. But Michael Block right now is 500 to 1. I think I've seen as long as, 700 to 1 out there in the market. I have a feeling I know where you're going to go with this, just because of knowing you now and doing shows with you and absorbing your work, but which I don't do on, when we're going to do this show, because I don't like to take a peek too soon. But is he missing the cut this week?
Stephie, I'm a really boring person when it comes down to these answers. Like, I know we have a feel-good story of what happened with him last week, and I hope for him that he does make the cut and he can continue this. It's a lot of money for a person like him to be able to add to his pocket, and it's great that he earned $300,000 last week. But I kind of think, and I equated this example, and it's not quite the same thing, so I don't want to say it's like quite the same scenario, but there was a scenario years ago where Floyd Mayweather faced Conor McGregor in a boxing match. And it was one of those things where I think the public ran out and everybody thought Conor had a better chance than he did. Now, that's a boxer versus an MMA fighter. Golf is a lot more of a volatile sport than we're looking at with boxing. Like, I would expect Mayweather's skills to 100 out of 100 times win. But the problem that we have here for Block is he's still a teaching pro that wasn't good enough at the age of 45, 46, 47 to make it on tour. I know he's had some tournaments where he's tried to make the cut, even this season. I know that he made the cut and came inside the top 15 at the PGA Championship. But to me, when I try to run numbers, there would be no scenario ever where this would have been a bettable option. Now, I understand, like, we wouldn't even have this as an option if he didn't come inside the top 15 because he wouldn't be in this tournament. But you wouldn't be offered a position here on a guy like Michael Block to make the cut if this was anybody who was not named Michael Block in this situation. For me, that means that when this number opened up at minus 210 to miss the cut, I think there was a lot of value on that. I've seen that moving up throughout the week. I think it's more in the minus 300 range now. At some point, the juice becomes not worth the squeeze, but I kind of think it's one of those spots where minus 400 and something is more of an accurate price. So I still think you're getting value on him to miss the cut. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, we're talking about a 120 person field, not a 156 person field. So all of a sudden his made cut equity does improve a little bit based off of just there being less players. But I think that you have a strong enough top of the board, a good enough middle of the board. And yeah, you have some weaker portions on the bottom, but like the Michael Block profile from start to finish, specifically from a statistical perspective for me, he's dead last in a lot of categories. And that's even including the categories that I ran for him last week. Like, not a good sign when you're 120th out of 120 players in weighted tee to green in my model, 120th in weighted scoring, 120th in weighted proximity. All those things kind of add up to where you also now have all these media responsibilities that he has to take on. He's not a player that's been in the limelight, but we've seen it historically of golfers or people from any sport, if you want to look at it, that all of a sudden get thrusted into the limelight and you don't get the practice the way that you want to or need to for it. So I hope for him that he makes the cut. It's a great story. From a financial standpoint, I'm going to go the other way because, as I said, I am a very boring person that if there's excitement going around on the one end that's going to move the number, I'm always going to run to the other end of it.
You're not boring. You just like numbers. That's okay. It's all right. We have all different things. Yeah, just one more thing on that. And you kind of touched on it and then we'll move on from here. But I think, these big emotional and for him wins, like was a very emotional, you get the hole in one, you're top, like the whole story itself. It's a Cinderella story. I don't like guys coming off of emotional weekends. I'm not in on it. Maybe could have got there next week if he wasn't playing this week to make the cut. A little bit too much emotion going into it. Let's talk about these Texas boys, Spieth and Scheffler. Between the two of them, where do you lean? We saw Scotty, finally. I'm not going to say it was great, but his putter is like returning. It wasn't as frustrating, still frustrating, not as frustrating as we've seen. Where do you lean between these two guys?
I mean, I guess if you're like asking me which one has a better chance to win, it will be Scotty Scheffler. I do think based off of the number, though, that you can get in these situations, and I'm not betting either to win this tournament. I'll throw that out there. I do think it's very likely that one of the two might. I don't love the value that we're getting in that spot. And as you can tell, my answer always comes down to value at the end of the day. But I kind of like Jordan Spieth. Like, I understand there's an injury around him. I know that we have this whole wrist thing. I thought he was a great ball striker last week. I didn't necessarily think he was pushed back by the injury. Now, I know he complained about it a bunch and said that he might have withdrawn. That worries me ever so slightly for different iterations of markets. Like, I know he's very popular on DraftKings because of his course history and his past success that he's had in Texas in general. But I like him from a ball striking perspective. The numbers look really good. And then when you look at Scotty Scheffler, like even with this tournament, I would say the middle of this is not as strong as we get on some weeks of these elevated events. I do think the top end of this, though, is really impressive. Like anytime you have the Hovlands, the Spieths, the Finaus, the Morikawas, there's enough names up there for when Scheffler ends up ranking number one in 4 of the 6 categories that I ran. That's a really strong output to give. And really the only thing that pushes him back in any way that I ran my model is the putter. I think if he makes putts and he's neutral or better than neutral, he wins this event. If he gives us one of those prototypical last 3 months Scotty Scheffler performances, probably starts pushing back in this direction to where he comes in like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and he doesn't end up winning it. But the one thing I will say for him and for every player in this field that struggles with their putter, these are really pure bent grass screens that usually either helps the pristine putters because they'll make more putts, or it also helps these putters that are not as good because you have a cleaner look and an easier surface to putt on. So if you were to tell me that this is the week that Scotty Scheffler caught fire with the putter and he won this tournament at 5-1, I think there's a really good potential of that. And that's kind of one of my answers, just talking about the outright market in general. I don't want to get myself overly exposed to this board when I do think the likelihood of a Scheffler, a Spieth, maybe even a Homa. I kind of like Homa this week, a Hovland. I think one of those guys most likely wins this event. And I don't want to start dumping dead money down the drain to where you get one of those winners and I'm chasing the middle of the board. I do have some names. I probably overexposed my card more than I wanted to, but I mean, I'm talking about 45 to like 90-1 shots that I took bets on. And I kind of expect them to lose because a Scheffler or a Spieth wins this.
Yeah. And I feel like it was similar last year where Scheffler he stays hot. It's like he's finished top 5 in 6 of his last 9 starts. And you kind of see him do this and then he gets another win because he's going to win again, probably more than once this season. It's just a matter of when. So he usually kind of stays on this streak. Then he'll kind of dip down after the win and go back up. It's all very similar to every time that he does this. You mentioned Homa. Where do you stand with him? Because this is, it is the type of course where we see Homa do very well. I was going to try to stick to just betting him in California after he's, hurt my feelings, but he does typically thrive with, with these tree lined courses. He finished 23rd here last year. So, the course history is here from a DFS standpoint. Where are you at with Homa?
I had been all out on Homa for pretty much the past month. The statistics were not looking good. I did not like his fit for some of these major championships. I don't necessarily love him on these difficult courses here and there. I think this is a different position for him, though. Tree line venue, he can find his accuracy off the tee here. I think that a lot of those numbers look fine when he can club down in these spots. He's third in my model in weighted approach plus weighted putting. That comes down to the pitch and putt contest that I keep talking about, to where I think he is more likely than pretty much every player in this field to hit the iron close from the proximity ranges that we're talking about. And really, that's about 125 to 200 yards is where you see the massive increase. You're going to have a decrease from 200 plus yards. That puts a lot of these players like Russell Henley into the equation, to where my model really liked Russell Henley this week, to where when you look at the long iron proximity from him, it usually goes south. When you look at these mid irons, all of a sudden he jumps up the board. So I like Homa. He grades well in my model. I think if I'm directly comparing him specifically from a DFS perspective here, it's probably one of the better leverage plays that you can find on the board. He, for me, seems of the $10,000 plus golfers, every single player is grading to be about 16+%. That gets all the way up to Scotty Scheffler at about 31%. I've seen numbers higher than that, but I have Homa at 12.5% right now. And I kind of think from a leverage standpoint, that might be one of the better plays on the board to try to get different in these contests.
Someone that I will probably be overexposed to Homa, knowing me. The thing is, I get to this point in the week and then I start doing more lineups, and then I just want to pick all my favorite people, and then that's what happens. And I have a bunch of lineups that are absolutely useless. But a guy that is, before we get into these smasher passes here, Tommy Fleetwood seems to be picking up a lot of steam this week. He's gaining strokes and you name the category in his last 3 starts, and he's just in really, really good form. His accuracy, precision off the tee, all that stuff could really be rewarded at a course like this. You also look at, his last 3 starts, T18 last week, T5 at Wells Fargo, I think T15 at RBC. Where are you at with Fleetwood? He is someone that I have been playing in DFS. Does he have a chance to win this?
There are 3 players to me that, and this is one of the reasons why I also don't have as much exposure to my card to begin this from an outright betting sense here. So there are 3 players that I am highly looking into trying to add on an in-tournament bet, whether that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if the number comes right. Homa would be one, which we just talked about. I think Victor Hovland's intriguing. I don't know if we ever necessarily get the number that makes sense. I don't know if he'll get pushed back far enough. I don't necessarily expect to be able to find a number that I like, but the numbers like him. He's a guy I'm at least looking at. The third one is Tommy Fleetwood. There were numbers that opened up early in the week. I saw him in the 30s, the mid 30s. I think anybody who got those prices probably got a really good number there. I'm less aggressively wanting to back a golfer that has not won on the PGA Tour when we're talking about a guy that's in the mid 20s. Like, I think that you're really asking a lot, and you're trying to jump the lineup there of like trying to find his first win when everybody's chasing it. But I don't know. I mean, like, let's see something from him on Thursday, and whether the number gets bloated because he doesn't play well, or we can find value in here at some point. Like, this has been a tournament historically. I hit Sam Burns here last year at 90-1 after round 1. I think there are opportunities with the way that this course plays. The par 4s are very challenging. You can get yourself back in this event more so than other tournaments because of the weather and because of the difficulty of this course. And if all of a sudden you start making birdies when other people are making bogeys, you can shoot yourself up the leaderboard. So I really like Fleetwood this week. I agree the ownership on DraftKings or on any DFS site is really starting to push to an aggressive number, but I'm fine eating the chalk in this position. I think it's good chalk, and I'm usually the person that tries to run the other way, as I keep saying in all these positions where everybody wants to back one thing, I go the other way. But I can't find too many reasons that I don't like Fleetwood for this event, and he's also another player that's inside the top 3 of my model when it comes to this pitch and putt contest. That's something that meant a lot to me this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's get into some of these smasher passes. I'll hit you with my first one. Since I've seen you last, I've really fallen in love with this player. Like, to the point where it's probably going to start getting a little bit annoying on the show. He's on my season-long team. He broke my heart finishing his first round, and that's Eric Cole. How do you feel smasher pass Eric Cole at? I think he's at 7,200 for DFS right now. How do you feel about Eric Cole?
My model likes Eric Cole, and I think there's a bunch of ways to consider playing him. And I actually wrote up an article today that my round one play for Thursday is Eric Cole minus 110 over Sam Stevens. A lot of my head-to-head wagers have more to do with trying to fade somebody than the person that I'm actually backing in these spots. So it's more of a fade of Stevens than it is me trying to get exposure necessarily to Cole. But, it's limited data, which I always talk about on this show. That worries me because when you're running limited data, it only takes one or two tournaments to go south for all of a sudden this top 15 expectation that your model might be saying turns into he's 70th in your model. So I like to temper expectations in those positions because you at least have to be aware of that. But 14th in my model overall, he has this positive trajectory when we look at these short courses. I don't think he's necessarily the greatest driver of the ball when we look at distance or accuracy. So if you're telling me that some of the off the tee stuff gets mitigated to begin with, and now we can use his strengths that he has, I don't love the ownership. I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't ever love when you get these 10% plus low $7,000 golfers. I think a lot of times those end up being traps in those spots. But my model, at least with the way that the numbers are being spit out in this, I like him a lot. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to be massively overweight just because of those concerns that I talked about. But for a golfer to be, as I said, 14th overall at $7,200, there's a lot of intrigue there, which I can understand why the public likes him.
Right. Which makes me feel like I'm being seduced. And I thought it was way more fun when not everyone was on him. But, you look at the season that he's having and it's just, he started out by actually missing his 4 straight cuts entirely. He's had 5 top 25s this season, 3 in his last 4 starts. Like you mentioned, that weakness off the tee is obviously there. But outside of that, he's been playing great golf, immaculate short game. He's top 10 in strokes gained approach for this field. I like him. I like what he could probably do, but this is also a guy that, is there a little bit of volatility just from experience wise? Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. And anytime that you have a cheap price tag with a lot of ownership, it's at least something that you have to keep in the back of your mind.
Absolutely. All right. Why don't you hit me with your first one?
So, Stephie, we haven't done a show in a while. I feel like it wouldn't be it's a standard show for us at this point for me to name this player. Smash or pass. At some point, it has to work. Brian Harman.
It's funny. He's someone where I tweeted before this show, do you ever just totally ignore when he's lighting up? A guy's name will light up in my research, everywhere. And I'm just blatantly just ignoring it because I can't do it. I probably will find myself with him in, a couple of lineups, but I'm probably going to pass this week.
I mean, that's probably the fair answer. I think I've asked that about 6 times, and it's probably gone south on me 6 times.
One time. It's going to happen, though. Just like Alex Smalley, just like Taylor Moore. One day, you guys, you just watch. They will win.
Here's my thoughts on Harman, just to give the opposite answer here. And I think as an industry, one of the things I've noticed from the general public when lineups get made and popularity comes out, I am not a big course history person. I always talk about that. And I think people are much more course history advocates than I am. And one of the reasons why I'm not a course history advocate is going back to what I keep saying. Everybody else goes in that direction. I try to move the other way there. And I think that when everybody is playing a golfer because of a course history answer, when the statistics do not check out the way that you want, you're solely basing it off of one thing that at that time, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, he entered this tournament maybe with better form than that person has now, and they have found success. And you're paying 20% ownership to get there. I think that that's where the duds come into play because you're basing it off of one answer that, in my opinion, even at a predictable course like this, is less predictable. Now, it's a different answer with Harman here because the current form is terrible, Stephie. I don't know how many times he can miss a cut for me. I understand this, but because the current form is so bad, the course history is getting absolutely ignored by everybody. I see sub 7% in ownership. I know he missed the cut here last year. I understand there's a lot of missed cuts that we're talking about, but just look at the 4 years before that. 8th in 2021, 23rd in 2020, a 14th in 2018. I'm not so sure that a PGA championship of last week is really indicative of what Brian Harman is performing with his game right now. It's not quite the ideal setup of length. Like, I've seen him find success at some of these longer venues in the past, but that wouldn't be the venue that I would like pencil in of this is where Brian Harman's going to play well. For me, it's these short, methodical layup venues where bogey avoidance comes into play. He's third in my model in strokes gained total on short courses. He's third in my model in bogey avoidance. He's a golfer that when all of a sudden I run stats for him, he starts skyrocketing up my model to where I can make him a legitimate top 10 win equity play in this tournament. It's a little bit lower right now from an overall rank sense just because of what he is producing. That's one of the reasons why I do look at current form, because I don't want a player to all of a sudden grade number one for me that has missed 10 cuts in a row. Not that Harman's missed 10 cuts in a row, but a player that's missing a bunch of cuts in a row. And we're like completely getting rid of the important data that he's been performing recently. But to me, this is just leverage, pivot, contrarian. All those answers equate for me saying Brian Harman is a really good value on this board that can make a run up the leaderboard. And I have him to win this tournament at 70-1. I don't think that that's an outlandish position to be on. It's an inflated price because of the recent form that we've gotten.
Spencer, you are a very loyal man, and I think that that is one of your best
qualities.
I am. Is no matter what, you are very, very loyal, and I admire that deeply. We'll see where your loyalty stands. I wasn't gonna mention this person, but since you brought him up from
I know you're gonna say, I think.
Do you? Is it Steven Yeager? Because I need to get your feelings. It's actually not gonna be a smash or pass. I need to get your feelings on Yeager this week because I have wrote him off like he just until his putter again, like
it's been bad.
I have to say this every week about someone until his putter does not stink ass. Like I just got to stay away from him. I can't do it. I can't get behind Steven Yeager right now. He hurts my feelings way too much. We are not good friends. He's only gained strokes putting once since January. If he performs well this weekend for me, it's obviously the ball striking. But outside of that, it's a lot of cuts, not a lot of top end finishes. Just, I don't know. He's boring to me.
It's not a lot of top end finishes because of the putter. And that's what makes it frustrating. And I guess it goes back to the answer that I talked about a second ago. When you get these pure bent grass greens, it either helps the really good putters or the really bad putters. Maybe that's a reason why Yeager can find success here. But I could understand, and we've seen it with the ownership, like on Monday, I want to say he was 15, 16%. Now I see him at about 8 or 9%. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are under the same mentality that you are, that they are sick of whatever this is that Yeager is producing every single week, where it's, he makes a cut, he bombs on the weekend, he misses every single putt. Like there was a hole on, I believe it was Sunday. Those were really difficult par fives. Nobody got there in 2 shots. He got there in 2 shots. He has like 45 feet for eagle. He 3-putts and ends up missing a putt from like 3.5, 4 feet for birdie. That just keeps happening every single tournament. And I think people are sick of watching that on the feed pop up that, oh, Yeager missed once again from 4.5 feet. Oh, Yeager missed his par putt from 5.5 feet. My model likes him. I know I keep giving that answer every single time we've done a show together, and it's going to continue that way just because there are essentially 4 golfers for me in 2023 that have seen massive increases when it comes to their projected win equity and just how they're moving in my model. Mm-hmm. Wyndham Clark, recent winner. Jason Day, recent winner. Ricky Fowler, who, yes, did not give the finish that we wanted at the PGA Championship, but I think is moving in the right direction. And we can talk about what Fowler's actual win equity is, and that's a different conversation to have. But he is not the golfer that he was, and I think you would agree with this. Of like 2 years ago. He is more back to where he was than this person that was missing every single cut at the bare minimum.
Yeah. And he's not quite, and we've said this before on the show. Like he's not quite at this, like Jason Day is back. No. Like, I think that's a fair statement to say. Like everyone knows that, like outside of him, obviously, like being too hungover to practice all week and just like doing his thing, which is another reason why I don't really like guys like Block when you have these emotional wins and emotional weekends. Like sometimes we don't see it go well. But yeah, like I don't think I wouldn't say that he's back like we saw Day, like we see Day now, but he's he's getting there where like I'm getting more comfortable where I might be involving him, which is a lot for me, for people that follow me and know that like I am the biggest advocate for like everyone needs a Ricky Fowler intervention, but I'm starting to understand it. I don't think everyone's as like psychotic anymore for, going after him week after week. But yeah, Day is like I wouldn't put them in the same category at least.
Day is a top 10 player in my opinion at this point right now. I would say Ricky Fowler is more of a fringe top 25 player. But I think that's really good for when Ricky Fowler was falling outside the top 100. Like we have seen improvements now to where I trust him more. But the point of that was the fourth player of that is Steven Jaeger. Okay. A lot of that comes from the distance that he's added here in 2023. The ball striking looks really good. The around the green game is immaculate. And if you're talking about smaller than average greens, that around the green game should play really well for him. Putter is a massive concern. For DFS, I am probably in on him because he is sub 10% now. I was going to be out when he was going to be 15 to 17%. I think all of a sudden when you remove 5 to 7% of the ownership, it becomes much more intriguing, the backup player that my model actually likes. But you kind of have a bunch of players in that lower $8,000 section that you have to make decisions on. And I think when you take a guy like Jaeger and Harmon, which we talked about, and I think KH Lee is a really interesting one where he has absolutely no course history to speak of, but the numbers look really good if you want to try to find a contrarian name to pencil into a lineup and just know when he pops, he's going to pop big. And when he doesn't, there is going to be higher miscut equity. But when there's 4, 5, 6% ownership on those golfers, you can take a swing for the fence. And I think that's just one of the things for everybody to always be aware of when they are making builds. It comes down to what is your contest selection? Are you playing these massive MME contests to where, there's 150 lineups per person that can be entered, that you have tens of thousands of people playing? Well, then all of a sudden, KH Lee becomes a really intriguing name to throw in there where you can get different. When you all of a sudden start playing these single entry 500 person contests, ownership doesn't matter as much. You can treat it more like a cash game. All of a sudden, names like Scheffler and Spieth, and this ownership doesn't quite equating to what it does the other way with it. So I think it's always situational dependent on if somebody is playable, but I'm kind of starting to lean in this example right now with Jaeger to where I will be using him in MME contests, these larger contests, just because he is sub 10% right now.
Okay, I hear a contrarian name, which I don't know. By this point in the week, you start seeing everyone's name popping up on Twitter. Like there's really no one that's not being spoken about. I don't know that we've actually ever talked about this player on our show. I'm going to butcher. I always butcher his for Akshay Bhatia. 6,700. Smash or pass, where are we at?
I think Bhatia gets one of those situations where there's a lot of ownership around him. Now we're talking about a $6,000 golfer. I like him from a long-term sense. The data for me is very intriguing. He's 25th in my model. I just don't know if I can grasp the idea of playing like a 7 to 10% golfer in the $6,000 range where I am pulling such limited data from him that I know what he is from an upside answer. And we have seen it pop at some of these, I would say, maybe easier tournaments than what we're getting here. Like, I still think that there's going to be some challenge. You could make an argument that the rain that's been in this area over the past couple weeks might soften this. And maybe this allows him to be more of the birdie maker that we know him to be. But I don't know, like, all of a sudden lineups start looking very similar when you start penciling in these very popular $6,000 golfers, because everybody wants to start the lineup with Scottie Scheffler. Everybody wants to consider Jordan Spieth. And then you're left in the spot where you're in the $6,000 section. It's like, oh my God, I need to throw a name into this lineup to make this work. And all of a sudden Bhatia becomes the very popular choice that everybody throws in. And it's kind of the same answer that I just talked about a second ago. If it's a single entry, okay, you really only need to get different in like one spot, really, in those positions, if that. If we're now talking bigger contests, I don't know. I'd probably just make them beat me.
Yeah, I'm like Spielman, the former GM of the Vikings, who butchers everyone's name like repeatedly, and that will not be That may have been the first on the show. It will not be the last. I'll continue to do that. He calls, what cracks me up, he calls Jared Goff Jeff Goff like all the time. And I don't know why, but I think it's the funniest thing in the entire world. But with him, and then I'll let you get into yours. I just think his iron's been great. I think I would have been more in, because you see him find success when it's like a weaker field. And this field is not as weak as we would have like thought it would have been. So that's where, you know, it's funny because at the end of the notes, it just says, but fuck it, I'm in. Like, I'm kind of aware of like the volatility of this player, but at the same time, like, I love him in DFS. I think, you know, he's had 2 missed cuts over his first 10 starts. In those, he only lost strokes on approach 1 time. I think that, again, very volatile player. I think in this range has a lot of potential, a nice higher ceiling, but I'm very aware of the risk that comes with him.
I think when you look at the $6,000 section in general, and this is probably where the industry as a whole has gotten so much more intelligent over these last couple of years, all the players that my model likes, and I will throw Batia into that mix. Like, I don't want to give this opposite answer that I don't think he can find success here. He most certainly can. But you have guys like Batia, Ben Martin. There's a handful of others. My model likes them too. Nate Lashley would be another. I just don't think you can play all of them. You're going to have to pick and choose your spots here.
Right.
I think if all of a sudden you're playing every single $6,000 golfer that is 7+% owned, you're better off just not playing at that point with it. So there's probably players that you can pivot onto. I don't know if the ownership is necessarily low enough, but I like Mark Hubbard at sub 5%. I think that's a name that is gaining more traction as the week goes on, though. But I bet him to come top 40. I bet him to win this tournament. You can find in the 300 to 1s at this point. That's just a name to keep in mind. I mean, an Andrew Novak is a 1% owned golfer that kind of has this boomer bust trajectory in my model. Robbie Shelton has a boomer bust trajectory in my model.
He's not as low priced, but what's Chez Reeves' ownership looking like these around this point? Because he was someone that I am a little bit fond of this.
I see 6%. So I guess he's another name that falls into that mix. But look, I think the interesting answer about him is specifically from a betting standpoint. When this opened up, his number was very inflated compared to some of these prices in this range. And I've seen him moving down, like at least to the point where some of the money that he has taken in has been respected money. So one of the things that I do is I will run on my model what the Monday outright odds are when I take the aggregated number from 3 different books that I run for. And that's just like the standard DraftKings, FanDuel's, Bet365s. I'm just trying to find the very standard 3, and then we'll go from there. Obviously, you can price shop and find better. But Chez Reeves is a guy that at those books went from 400 to 1 on average to 150 to 1 now.
Interesting.
That is, I believe, I'm running it right now. I believe that is the biggest. Yeah, it's the biggest difference. So Chez Reeves went from 400 to 150. Carson Young went from 400 to 175. Sepp Straka went from 125 to 70. And then the fourth one would be Bezadenhout, who went from 70 to 50. That would just be the percentage difference.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's something worth looking into. Like, not all money that ends up moving the market is sharp, but it's at least credible enough money that they decided to move it and they didn't want to keep getting hit with that same wager over and over again.
Right. All right. Why don't you give me another smash or pass here?
All right. Let's go with, I guess, one of the players I've already talked about a little bit here, Russell Henley. He was 45 to 1 to open the week. That number's dropped a little bit. I see the ownership on DraftKings kind of moving in like a 5% range up or down. I'm hoping that he ends up going off at sub 15%. I don't know if that's going to be the answer right now, but smash or pass on Russell Henley?
I'm actually going to smash. I feel like I typically, when we play this, I'm always passing, but I'm not going to pass this time. I'm going to smash. I think his, that lack of distance off the tee won't necessarily, kill him this week. And while you saw his putter last week was like very blah, his approach play is like fine. And I'm not going to get there outside of like a DFS standpoint, but I think he's a nice play.
So I'll give a pro and con here because I do have the outright ticket on him and I do like him for DFS. So the pro is going to be the driving accuracy at a club down venue. Number 1 in driving accuracy, number 6 in my model when you take total driving, which essentially was a 70-30 split of total driving from accuracy over distance. I did incorporate a little bit of distance just because I don't like running it 100% zero in any iteration of doing that. And then it took that number and it attached it to a GIR percentage to essentially figure out who was the best player when you added those two things together. 6th in my model for that. The con, that is a very big con, dead last in this tournament in expected putting from 10 plus feet.
We don't have to worry about that.
I think that's the thing that I've realized at this point is like, I just find all the best ball strikers. And the players, it's, if they make a putt, they make a putt. But I actually think, like, all jokes aside with that, that's kind of what you want from an outright answer. You want these guys that have really high ceilings if they can present an aberrational part of their game and increase on it. Then these guys that are these super safe, steady players that are going to give you that like T20, T15 that are not going to necessarily ever win the tournament. Like, to me, when I look at Henley's profile, he either makes a run at this because he makes some putts, or the putter goes ice cold and he misses the cut. But I'd rather have that output with it than to take a guy that I don't think possesses actual win equity. And that's like the same answer that I'm given for KH Lee. Very volatile when we look at the course history, but there is upside to be found if he does hit. I'll throw in a secondary one here, which I guess you can give me a smash or pass on, which is very, very up and down with the course history here. Siwoo Kim.
I don't have a lot of exposure to him, but I am also, he's another one that this week, like if he was someone to have success and finish top 20, like, would I be surprised? Not at all. I will smash it though. I think that if you're looking at some of these guys, I don't know exactly how he's priced in DFS off the top of my head. But I can be in on Siwoo Kim.
So Siwoo Kim is $9,000. He is projected to be the lowest owned player, I guess, from above Tom Hoge. Tom Hoge's the first person that my model thinks is going to be projected lower. And by the way, Tom Hoge gives that exact same answer that we're talking about with these players of players that have not played well here ever. But I actually think that if they do put it together, that they can. I don't have a ticket on him. Just a name to keep in mind. Hoge is a golfer who's number 1 in my model in this pitch and putt.
We are very pro Tom Hoge podcast, and at some point we've just been waiting for him to put it together. Like, I thought that he was going to start putting it together more towards match play, but it just hasn't totally happened yet. But I Siwoo Kim I can always get behind.
Yeah, and like Siwoo Kim's course history: withdraw in 2021, miscut in 2020, miscut in 2019, 66th in 2018. So that's over the past 5 years. Not ideal. That's obviously not what you want to see, but, and I know that this isn't necessarily the ideal way to look at this, but if you took this statistical profile that he had, like the exact way that I ran my model, and you changed this course and you made it a Pete Dye venue where he has historically found success, I legitimately think he'd be like 30% owned.
Yeah.
And even at the price tag, but all of a sudden you throw him with no course history and everybody's off of him. So I think you have to know what you're signing up for here. This can flame out very quickly, but it's one of the reasons why. And, it opened up in the 40s as an outright. It got up into the 50s. I went to sleep on Monday hoping I was going to wake up on Tuesday and see that number in the 60s all of a sudden. And at some point there was pushback with sharp money that knocked it back down. And I ended up only getting a 45-1 number. So I kind of made a mess of that. But those are the exact golfers I'm looking for, because if you're telling me that the winner is most likely going to be one of these high-end names, the Schefflers, the Finaus, the Morikawas, the Hovlands, whoever else that we've talked about here that we've liked, you're going to need a player who can provide that upside that we're looking for. And I think it's going to have to be a guy like Siwoo Kim, a guy like KH Lee, a guy like Tom Hoge, these guys who shoot up the board to where, they might come in dead last, but if they put it together, they can compete to win on this course.
Yeah, 100%. Let's get into our overrated and underrated. I'm going to take the overrated before I let you go, just because I know this is a player that we are not a pro this player podcast at all. And I know that he is getting a lot of love, and that is Morikawa. Listen, it's a great course fit for him. He almost won this. It's, you know, the ball striking last week was good. He's putting is improved. I'm basing this off of like a vibe. He is just not Morikawa right now. And he doesn't seem to be hitting the ball the way that he has in the past. So looking outside of statistics, because I know there is a lot to support, and I love Morikawa, so I hope that he makes me bite my tongue here. But for me, I think he's a little overrated. I wouldn't say overrated because he has all the skills to do it, but he's someone that I'm totally out on.
This is the best he's graded in my model. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily play him. Like, I would rather use Hovland and Scheffler, and that's kind of the unfortunate thing for Morikawa when I run numbers is when he gets pushed up into this upper or mid $10,000 section, and even when he's in the 9,000s in a better tournament, I never find myself wanting to go to him. I always think the ownership is too much. I think the public, as you kind of mentioned best, Stephie, they are much higher on Morikawa than we are. So you kind of get this golfer that is like, yeah, the price is okay. The ownership is really high. I'd rather make him beat me. If there's a week that he's going to beat me, I could see it being at this tournament just because his ball striking and his proximity is so immaculate that there's a reason why he has found success here. But I mean, if I'm directly comparing him to like Spieth, Hovland, or Scheffler, he ranks last for me out of those four. So I'm lower on him for that reason, even though he is a top 5 person in my model.
Yeah, it'd be a nice week for him to, you know, put things kind of totally back together, but we just haven't seen that from him in a while. So for now, I'm going to, remain out. You know, he might pop into I'm not going to lie. He will probably be in some kind of lineup at some point. So, but that's probably just due to volume. Who do you have for overrated this week?
Let me give somebody that's not so low down the board. Like, obviously, Michael Block. I think that price tag is kind of egregious. I talked about him missing the cut. I think if you want to get into a really gross head-to-head, and there's a lot of them out there with this player, you could consider fading Adam Schenk. I mean, he's not a guy. I mean, he's last in a lot of ways of how I ran things. He's 112th overall for me. But I guess I will give... Let me say Kurt Kitayama at 7,900. So my model has him overrated when it comes to ownership, and it has him overrated when it comes to the price tag that we're getting here. He is a very up and down golfer every single tournament, and you don't have to look any further. 4th place at the PGA Championship. There's 3 missed cuts before that, a 5th place the tournament before that, a missed cut before that. He kind of gives you these ups and downs, and that's fine when he's like $7,000. He's 1% owned and you want to bet on the upside that he does possess. I think it's another story when he starts pushing 10% and you're backing this golfer now who all of a sudden has a ton of, like, if you compare him to, let's say, Brendan Todd, I mean, the ownership is not quite the same, but it's within a couple percent where I think it's at least worth mentioning it. Like, Todd is a much safer play than Kitayama is going to be. And I'm not so sure, like if Kitayama, I probably wouldn't get to him regardless, but if he was just like sub 5%, then all of a sudden I could be like, well, I think he's overowned. And it's like the Brooks Koepka answer that I gave at the beginning of the show. Well, I think he's overowned, but he's also, or I'm sorry, he's overpriced, but the ownership on the other way makes sense with it. I think with Kitayama, when you have an overpriced and an overowned player, like that's just, to me, I'm out. It's like, I'll make him beat me, and it doesn't mean that he can't produce and give you back-to-back top 10 finishes, but I don't want to land in this position to where I'm chasing last week's result with a price tag at a course where a lot of it gets mitigated for him. Like, I think when you lose some of this long iron proximity, I really liked them when I ran numbers last week because 200 plus yards, that proximity adds up. When all of a sudden we're seeing a massive decrease there, he loses one of the best parts of his game. So I'll say Kitayama, but I also think even though he has no ownership, if you can find a head-to-head matchup against Adam Schenk, I kind of like trying to go that direction.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's probably, again, like some of these guys, like I may not be in on them, but that doesn't mean that I don't think, like they could very easily prove me wrong. It's not that I don't see like the potential upside. For my underrated, I have Grillo. I feel like you're going to hate this. I don't know, whatever. I like it. I mean, just ignore last week. Like, let me talk, and like, we're going to ignore last week. He finished T23 at Wells, 5th in Mexico. He had elite iron play at both of them. It's not that I think that he's going to necessarily win this tournament. But for him to finish top 30, top 20 as a DFS play, I like Grillo.
I think he produces in streaks, and I understand he missed the cut last week, but that's not a tournament. Like, that's such a wonky. You don't have to, like, when all of a sudden Sung Jae, who makes every single cut, and I know we can talk about Sung Jae's travel coming from across the ocean, and then all of a sudden having to play this tournament. Like, you could make that argument that that's maybe where Sung Jae came into play. But when you have taken players that have been steady recently in Sung Jae and Day and whoever else you want to name, like, I don't want to necessarily look at Griot's miscut and say that he has lost form all of a sudden. He had 3 really good tournaments before that. Yes, he's going to be popular, but he's inside the top 15 for me, even with the miscut last week for safety. He's been a little all over the place at this tournament, but when he has popped, he's popped in a big fashion with it. So I like to play. I have no problems with Griot, which I never want to play Griot. Like, I'm always out, and I'm kind of pretty much fine with him this week.
Yeah, you're like I feel like you're never like you're never totally in on him. And also with him won in Korea, no, didn't he, when he was there?
Yes.
Like, it's not like quietly did win. Yes, he was traveling back. So I think people are knocking him probably a little bit. Like, I'm more inclined to take him than I am to take Morikawa, honestly.
I am too.
Yeah, which is actually, again, like very on brand for the two of us because we both like lean in a lot of scenarios. Who's your underrated for the week, though?
I'm going to go, and I don't know how underrated we can get when this guy is, like, because I have given the anti-low $7,000 answer of ownership of all these guys of why I don't like them with low or high ownership down in this range. I'm going to give one that has a lot of ownership here, Hayden Buckley. I really like where Hayden Buckley is trending right now with his game. And once again, I don't want to just use the PGA Championship example, but PGA Championship 26, 43rd at Wells Fargo, 5th at the RBC Heritage, 10th at the Valero. Anytime that you look at these courses, and I don't think this is one that necessarily works to his benefit here because he's a top 5 player on tour when it comes to strokes gained off the tee. And I know I've talked a little bit about how this course mitigates some of the off the tee numbers, but it is very encouraging for me when you tell me that it is taking away one of the best aspects of a player's game, at least with the way I built it. I'm not necessarily saying that it's 100% going to play out that way. Historically, it has. But if you're telling me it's taking away one of the best aspects of a player's game, and that golfer is still ranking as a massive value for me that's inside the top 20 and from an overall rank sense inside the top 25, there's a lot to like about that golfer. And I think that the ownership, even at 8-9%, is a little bit too low at this point. And he's a very nice answer. Like, I have more data on him if I'm directly comparing than I would to like an Eric Cole. I like both of them, but I'd be more inclined to want to play Hayden Buckley because of the extra data that I do have. And he makes lineup construction really simple when you put this together because it opens up a lot when all of a sudden he does get put into a lineup. And no matter if you're playing in a big contest or a single entry, there's a lot of ways that you can fit him where it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Another name, and then before we jump into who's your daddy, is Nate Lashley too, is someone who is popping up all over the place. Like, in this field is like top 10 approach. You look at like good drives, you name it. He was just popping up all over the place. So he's someone that I'll probably have some exposure to as well. Ben Martin's another interesting name.
I'll add Hubbard. Mentioned him,
another interesting name. Like, there's a few of these guys that I think you can get value and, they rate out very nicely for this course. Two names that I just want to touch on before we do who's your daddy, who I'm going to decide on the fly. But
I have massive gripes, by the way, massive gripes.
Would you pick Finau or Hovland if you like gun against your head? Who has a better chance of winning this tournament?
I'll say Hovland.
Okay. God.
I do like Finau though.
I know I feel like I'm always torn between the two of them. Hovland keeps burning me. Last week was more painful. Thankfully, the top 20 made me feel much better because I got a good number on that. But yeah, I am torn on what I want to do with Finau. He might be someone like, some live action on him is probably the direction that I would lean. But who's your daddy? Let's get into this here. I didn't realize I took some of these guys, and a lot of the guys I would have liked to take would have been nice for this course. So I have taken Victor, Jordan, Hoagie, Siwoo, which would have been nice for this week because he screwed me the week I took him, Scotty, and Xander. You have taken Day, Thomas, Homa, Hatton, Rory, and Scheffler. Where are you going this week?
Okay, first of all, Stephie, we have to talk about this. I would have taken Tony Finau at the Mexico Open, and this would be a completely different contest. I used him in all my one and done events that I was playing. I feel like you have taken this mentality in this contest right now, and maybe that's the reason why we weren't doing shows where you're in kneel down formation. You got the lead. All of a sudden, we're not making picks anymore. I'm down $2 million. I can't find a way to get myself back into this contest now, and I'm running out of time. I think we need a recount, a restart, a redo, whatever you want to use on this. This has gone horribly wrong.
It definitely has gone horribly wrong. We're not going to do a redo. We are not. Although I hear you, it's a good case. Maybe we can come up with like some type of head-to-head where you can take some of my money, but listen, I think you're not that far behind me. You really could catch back up this week. You just
I lost a lot of big tournaments that I could have had. I'm going to have to move this up on the pecking order and talk to Jason Gold, I think.
Well, Hatton and Rory really screwed you here.
They really did.
Taking those fat goose eggs. Because, I mean, even Hoagie and Kim, I had them on horrible, horrible weeks. And it was only like a little bit of money. But at least it was something. So who are you going to take this week to get yourself back on track?
Well, this might be in spite of everything that's going on. And I can't take your ultimate daddy. And you don't even have the possibility to take the player that I'm going to do. But I can't take Scotty because I've already used him. I think the next most painful one, if he did win and I had him, since you can't use him, Jordan Spieth. So I am picking this out of spite at this point. So when Jordan, your like secondary daddy, ends up winning me this contest and getting me back into it, it'll be a very nice run for me coming back in this.
Yeah, that will be. It's annoying because even before looking, because I did, it's been a little bit, so I didn't totally remember who I've taken. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just go like Spieth. No, you already took Spieth. Okay, maybe this is the week I just take Scheffler. No, I already did that. Okay, fine, Hovland. I already did that. Siwoo Kim, like maybe not to use, one of these guys would have been nice. I think I'm going to take Finau this week. I think it's risky. I feel okay taking that. I don't know but do I want to save him for the end of the season? Hold on. Now there's a little bit of strategy here that I need to think about. Because it might be in my best interest to save him here. Gosh, I wish I could phone a friend, but I can't because
you can phone me.
No, I don't trust you.
Michael Block, maybe? Do you think Michael Block would be?
Yeah, Michael Block. I'm actually leaning Fleetwood or M here. Do I roll with the public favorite here? I'm going to go Fleetwood. I'm going to do it. That'll be my exposure of Fleetwood this week. That's it.
I think Fleetwood is a very good pick.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Like if I didn't pick Jordan Spieth, it probably would have been Fleetwood as my second choice.
Would it? Okay. I feel better. Because sometimes you try and trick me and I try to outsmart you and it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. So I'm glad. I feel more confident now.
Well, good pick, Stephie. I assume you will still have the lead for a long time in this contest.
Hope so. Maybe you'll get it back. One of these weeks, you might be able to pull it from me. Any last words? Any last thoughts? Name you have to get out there before we are done?
No, I appreciate everybody out there who has tuned into this show. I am glad that we are back doing this, Stephie. I miss doing this show with you, and let's have a really good week and try to win some money.
Okay, one name we didn't say that I have to mention now that I just thought. Also, Rose.
Yeah.
Someone before we get out of here, last note is Rose. I will not be mad at you if you have exposure to him in any capacity. I think that he is, the one thing that was kind of plaguing him was his approach play, and that's definitely improved since last year. And we're seeing him play at a really, really, really good level right now, and he has elite course history. So he's someone that I like. Before we get out of here, I had to get that off my chest. But until next week, this show is always a blast. Thanks everyone that tuned in, and have a good weekend.